The Prime Minister wants to tell you that in a situation where we are able to abolish the monarchy, we will have a system that is more democratic, that is more responsive to what voters actually want, and in a situation where people actually make money. People are not wasting their taxpayer money on things that they don't actually desire or they don't actually want. On the opposition bench today, we want to first tell you that it is not the case that abolishing the monarchy would have any net benefit on the financial side of things, especially in the UK when they're struggling so much with, a lot of democracies nowadays are struggling so much with rearmament and struggling so much with other issues that they must have to tackle. And secondly, we're going to tell you that destroying this symbol of British soft power is very detrimental to Britain's standing as a power today, especially when it's struggling to stay relevant in a multipolar world and in a world dominated by another powerful Anglophone country. Okay, so I'm gonna first talk about OO, and then I'm gonna bring up the main points that that our bench has. So firstly, they tell you that in their model, they tell you that they're going to have a situation where they're going to remove any symbol of power. They're going to allot Buckingham Palace and other, like for example, palaces and stuff that the monarchy currently holds, and they're going to try their best to minimize the power. Now, we want to tell you that this is not important to their case on two things. First of all, the monarchy already stays out of power for most of the part. They may refuse to sign certain documents, but for basically the vast majority of legislation in the once something has passed through both houses of Parliament, they don't interfere. And because they don't, and the reason why they don't interfere is because they are a de jure power. If they interfered, they wouldn't be able to have a, like, if they interfered and they struck down an important piece of legislation, people would vote to bring them out. And they know this because they want to remain in power, and so they don't typically involve themselves in almost anything. There may be very niche instances where they do, and those situations, and there may be very niche instances where they do. And so in those, and so on the second thing about, onto their model, right? Especially on the financial side of things. If you were to take this already basically rubber stamp figurehead and to put them in a place where they're no longer in a position of power, they would eventually become more and more irrelevant as time goes on. They're currently making a lot of money later. They're currently literally bringing in more money than they ever spend on any of their palaces or whatever. They take in more money from tourism. It's been shown that abolishing the monarchy would take so much money away from tourism and other things that are ascribed to the British monarchy and British identity as a whole. So you're literally burning money if you take away and remove this symbol of, British government and British history. And so they met this in the way they say that, like, the British government uses a huge amount of money to travel, to create, hinder bureaucracy and to refuse to sign things. But as I said before, they don't typically oppose things that are passed by legislation already, because they know that they wouldn't be able to, and that they are essentially a figurehead in the sense that they wouldn't be able to meaningfully oppose anything. And so this greater ability to, they also say that there's a greater ability for you to tax the money that the government is being spent. But when they're in a position where they're no longer in power, they can probably only make money from, like, tourism and stuff. And so all these, like, different buildings and stuff, there's maintenance. They're not making money in the sense that eventually, like, they're not going to receive the help that they get or the status that is associated with the government, and so they won't. So that eventually it would destroy the source of revenue for the British economy. Yes.
So they would still be able to keep things like Buckingham Palace, and people would still want to go see it regardless of the title that's associated with. And you can see to this when you say that they already are somewhat irrelevant given they have no power.
Yes, but like the point that we're trying to say is that why would I go to a country and why would I visit a country where, if you notice most of these palaces that most European monarchs have, they are way less relevant than like Buckingham Palace and all the palaces that Britain has. Because all of these other countries, right, it's not a symbol of current power or a symbol of it's not a symbol of relevance that they have today. It's a symbol of relevance that they had in the past. And people don't typically associate these things anymore as strongly as they do today. And so for a lot of these reasons, we believe that the British monarchy would eventually fade into irrelevance and wouldn't be able to uphold all these points that they have. Okay, and onto our main point about undermining British soft power. The Commonwealth already provides this umbrella with which a lot of countries work together to promote British soft power. When a lot of countries during decolonization, right, the few years after decolonization, a lot of countries would seek approval from the British government in a world where Britain is increasingly facing a multipolar world, and they have to juggle many responsibilities between Europe and itself and NATO and other and its own self-interest. There is a umbrella that Britain can depend on for other countries to at least have a de jure reliance on. And the fact that Britain is a figurehead for a lot of these countries, right? They're the head of state in a lot of these countries. They look for a point of reassurance, a point that they are able to look up to in order to stand with. Like, it gives them footing in a way that isn't possible if they didn't have this symbolic tie to a country. And so Britain, the impact of this is that Britain is fighting to stay relevant, and it keeps the British relevant. And if, like, for example, the king travels to another country, yeah, they're spending money, but like having all these people turn out, all these people on screen, you can see that they come out and to visit, like, and to meet, like, such a powerful symbol of, like, the reason why Britain was so powerful is because not that it was powerful, but the reason why people, like, a big symbol of it was the monarchy itself. Having the monarchy literally visit your country is a big symbol, and having all these people turn out, like, really will really, like, change, will really, like, illustrate the opinions that people really have towards the outcome that is happening. So what have we told you today? So we told you that abolishing the monarchy will undermine soft power, and the fact that government runs that a lot of these benefits are not. A lot of these benefits are still going to be able to take place if that's the case. Yeah.
Long before I came to this country to study, I was exactly the tacky American tourist the opening opposition is so keen to keep. And it turns out that when I visit Buckingham Palace, especially as a kid with all my family, the governmental authority of the king isn't what draws me there. It's the people with the funny hats who don't react when you poke them, and the ridiculous fanfare around the idea of the monarchy in the first place. We think tourism is fine, and the only way that you can make this argument that these things are going to change is if you believe that all of the tourism would go away when the monarchy is abolished. We say it doesn't, because it's the physical infrastructure and tradition which still exists, regardless of whether you have governmentally abolished the monarchy in the first place anyway. Like, Buckingham Palace itself isn't going anywhere, so it's unclear whether you have a significant margin on tourism in the first place. Let's talk a little bit about this tourism and finances clash, and then go into explaining the money and legitimacy we get uniquely on our side. On tourism then, the first reason is the one that I've already described. This sort of infrastructure and tradition already still exists, and it's likely that those types of property that are like still been privately owned by the royal family will likely continue to keep going, A, because you want to stay at least somewhat relevant for the reasons they described, and B, because you want to generate more relevant revenue individually. So it's likely that all of these types of places stay, at least in the short term, until indeed eventually they get taxed out of existence, in which case the government can continue to run them, as happens in other European countries anyway. So all of the tourism stuff here I think is just symmetric. But also, even if you don't believe that, and you think there is massively more tourism in Britain under their side of the house, we say we don't care, because tourism, it seems to be zero-sum. So this is only a negative harm to Britain insofar as all those tourists go elsewhere otherwise. Like, think about it. Most people don't decide they want to go somewhere and then they create a vacation. They say, well, I have 2 weeks off a year. I'm going to go on vacation somewhere because I have the ability to do so. So if they aren't going to Britain, then it's likely that they're going to, like, France or to Portugal or anywhere else like that in Europe that's equally easily accessible. It's incredibly unclear why this tourism being for Britain as opposed to anywhere else is an advantage, because most people and most families make decisions about this before they decide where. Tourism is simply zero-sum. I'm unclear whether we get a significant margin overall, even if we do uniquely in Britain. Go for it. Closing, actually.
Under that the British monarchy will still have the title of the king and the queen alongside their palaces?
In the governmental terms, absolutely not, but I'm sure they also call themselves that. Great. Next, on to the idea of symbology and irrelevance. I think there are 2 points here in opening opposition. The first is that eventually, they'll die out in terms of their relevance culturally and stuff like that, and then one that they'll die out in terms of their ability to actually influence things. And on the idea of cultural relevance, I think this is kind of fine, as in it seems tired to me to have their continued symbology actually be relevant. Insofar as people care about it, they'll continue to watch the things, so therefore those who are loyalists and care a lot about the crown can indeed continue to do so, but surely parading around at taxpayer expense isn't a necessary contingent for this to actually happen in the first place. So if over time it ends up happening that there is less relevance, then clearly that means that that's justified by the fact people are less interested in indeed going to see it. But in terms of them themselves dying out, I think this is probably unlikely. They'll be fine because the taxation that we describe will never outstrip the compounding returns you get of your massive pools of assets. On those pools of assets, because even if you do buy the tourism stuff, I think we just get a lot more taxpayer money on our side of the house. And here you can see Josh's mechanisms already on things like lifestyle, on luxury, on personnel, all of the wait staff who dress him and brush his teeth if you're the king. But also note here that we can scale this impact significantly by describing how, A, there are just lots of royals, and the structural reason here is because family trees branch out like this. They have little things going both directions as you have more children both directions. So therefore, more and more, there are lots of royals that all are funded by the taxpayers in these ways, or at least are heavily exempt because of their statuses. Which brings to the next reason, which is just the taxation benefits that now you uniquely get insofar as you get rid of their tax-exempt status. Because over time, the royal family has agglomerated massive amounts of wealth. A, because of the increasing value of real estate over the periods of time that they've had them, which compounds, and B, because they have no taxes that are reducing that generation to generation. As in when they pass it on to their children, there is no taxes as there are for other people. And then C, and most obviously and importantly, just the long period of time in which all of those values and the value of all of those assets they acquired centuries ago have compounded over time. What that means then is that as soon as we abolish the monarchy, that massive pool of wealth can actually be taxed, which is then a significant amount of money that exists. That's both through real estate taxes directly, but also through the death taxes that then happen when you try to pass that on into the future to your children. Insofar as those are very legitimate for everyone else, we don't see why this would be any exception for these people who have no right to get so in the first place. And because this is lots of money, and usually taxation happens at least in ways that are progressive, or otherwise in ways to get the most money from people who are the richest anyway, we think this is probably a really significant amount of money, even if you don't talk about the yearly spending that you already do on it. You just have more revenue and you have fewer costs. Probably this is a lot of money. A little bit more work then on why the money is used particularly well, because I think, importantly, to hush backlash against the individual political party that does the abolition, you have to use the money in particularly non-politically charged ways. Because if you always give the rhetoric to the opposition party that you were the one who created this politically charged policy and funded it by getting rid of the monarchy in the first place, that's a disastrous move. So you're much more likely to put it into things that are generally accepted and are much more basic, as in welfare that everyone agrees on, or debt servicing and things like that, which means that the money is likely to be used well insofar as to avoid the clear rhetorical harm of allowing the opposition party to have that fight. Lastly then, I think let's talk a little bit about the uniqueness of the illegitimacy as opposed to other governmental officials that maybe similarly are responsible, as in surely the British government overall is responsible for legacy colonialism. Why is it specifically about the monarchs? 2 points, as in addition to the one that already you get out of Josh, representation, which is clearly an important point of consistency overall. The first being on continuity. So insofar as governments and political parties change, they go in and out, they evolve internally and things like that, then probably their individual responsibility for the harms of history are existent, but not nearly as significant as a continuous political line. So the intuition here is that if a single political party was continuously in charge and their son took power again and again and again, then we think indeed they would be responsible in a much higher way for the harms that monarchy created, or that individual political party created, even if it was 50 or 60 years ago. So insofar as there's more continuity in the party, therefore we think there's more responsibility therefore, and therefore the illegitimacy of the monarchy is more significant. And this is also in consistency with the other policies that are already getting passed. That's why we don't like the idea of hereditary passage in the House of Lords, and why that was abolished too. The continuity is a big problem here, and therefore defines our illegitimacy. But also notice the inalienability of the idea of the monarchy in the first place. Because here is a special status that is afforded that cannot easily be taken away, and therefore has special rights to taxpayer money, to all of our money in the first place, based on nothing. Because the special status afforded to other leaders exists, but it's always conditional. You can be voted out, you can be impeached, you can be otherwise deposed. But here, the privileges and rights of the monarch are enshrined and unconditional, so there is no external mechanism by which they can be alienated from the people. As in, only the monarchy themselves could remove Prince Andrew from getting taxpayer funds, and we think that is a principal harm in itself. As in, anything that has an inalienable unenviable status that prefers certain citizens over other citizens is illegitimate insofar as it doesn't actually allow for the equality of humanity that we otherwise agree on. So because of all of those reasons then, we just think the illegitimacy there is too strong to ignore. If there is a single penny spent on these people that could be spent anywhere better, you ought to vote for opening government. Insofar as that's the case, it should be an OG.
Do I need to speak for this thing or?
It'll pick it up.
Okay, yeah. And before I start, verbal POIs, please. Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So in order to take this debate, what we need to prove on OO are 2 things, right? So first of all, that there are basically no unique harms of keeping the monarchy, and secondly, to prove that there are unique benefits to keeping the monarchy that we have already elaborated on a lot regarding tourism, regarding it as a figurehead, regarding it as a cultural symbol that the UK uniquely has in the world, right? So several things to cover in this debate here, so I'm going to further elaborate on why the monarchy is so uniquely the UK and why it's so unique as a cultural symbol to just this country, to just the United Kingdom and not anywhere else, and how this actually benefits the country, and also to talk about how by keeping them as a figurehead, you can actually bridge all these historical like the historical grievances between islands and colonies, and all the extraction stuff that propositions talk about, right? But first, one major rebuttal towards what they view, towards their argument of how the British monarchy is just illegitimate in the first place, right? So first of all, I think they already tackled this themselves, that they don't have power nowadays. They might have, okay, it is true that they gained power in the past illegitimately, but okay, nowadays they already don't have the power to keep on doing these, like, the remnants of whatever extraction techniques the government still remains, right? And this is extremely important, right? Because they are no longer responsible for whatever the fuck the British people elect that actually continue to exploit the immigrants from the people that from the countries that they colonized, or refuse to pay repatriation to these countries, whatever, right? So, but instead, by keeping the monarchy, we can actually give them one more bridge to keep on bridging these grievances that they have towards like the countries that they have like grieved, right? So this is okay. So this just brings on to our first major point right here, right? So I think a proposition just already talked about this. These royals, they did have diplomatic duties. What do these diplomatic duties look like? We look at like monarchs like Queen Elizabeth, like touring around different countries to visit, and also Princess Diana in the past had conducted like charity runs and also like other forms of like charity visits towards other countries. And all of these are ways to extend goodwill towards other countries and places, not just their colonies, as also other countries. This, by having a royal that is seen as one of the high symbols of your country, even though it's not an official, it does extend goodwill, and it means that you see these other countries as an equal, because like you're sending your, even if it's unofficial, it's still a well-known, internationally well-known head of state, and this is the head of state that is the most well-known in the world that does not hold official power, because it's the only monarchy it's the only famous monarchy remaining on the news cycle all around the world. I don't know about all those dead monarchies that they overthrew in France or in Imperial China, right? I only know about Queen Elizabeth II because it keeps popping up on my news cycle. Okay, and this is extremely important. I would elaborate on this later on how it exudes soft power, but back to this, right? So when you keep these monarchies as a figurehead, you can keep them as an equal to bridge historical grudges into the countries that you have historically colonized, to show that we see you, right? We don't just see you as someone to step on, we're actually visiting your land, we see your country's head of state as an equal, the people you elected as an equal, right? So this is going to be something that bridges historical grudges, because we believe that this shortens it shortens the distance between these people's nations, right? And what else? They said that they face backlash when they land. Okay, but anything else. But okay, so even if we're going to tackle this later. Sorry, but what are the other things that the monarchy can still go on to like bridge these differences instead of just visiting, right? So there are other, because they also said that the monarchy has has extracted power from other places. Like this includes all resources they got, all the flashy furniture they have in the palaces, the jewels they have. But the thing is that to exude goodwill, to improve relations between Britain and its ex-colonies and whatever they stole from whichever places they stole from, the British crown can still and has taken steps to gesture this diplomatic goodwill by, for example, returning some crown jewels to places they colonized, like India, so that they can improve the relations between them. And this is something that you lose, on their side, because all these jewels, all these precious stuff that they took, they are indeed taken by the monarchs in the past, and it is only them who has the greatest authority to return them and to actually gesture goodwill in this way. Okay, and let's say, even in the case that proposition says, okay, all of this stuff is marginal, people are still going to hate you regardless, right? But we believe, this is just marginal, right? But later on. But I believe that this impact is comparatively much worse, because first of all, they completely lose ability and legitimacy to return, and the platform to conduct all these like diplomatic visits and things. And secondly, we believe that the only remaining authority that has authority to do anything in the UK would be the democratically elected government. And if the and the people are just going to direct all the hate towards the democratically elected government for the flaws that they have done, right? And also, if all these diplomatic gestures were conducted by Norwich are not enough to bridge the grievances between these countries, well, we say that these people are just going to hate the country regardless, because you said that they associate the monarchy with the country. They will hate the country regardless of whether the monarchy exists or not, right? And by leaving the monarchy here, so that they can at least do some gestures to show that, okay, we're sorry. At least it gives them the platform to bridge these grievances further, instead of directing all hate towards the government for which they are democratically elected. Okay, so before I move on, one POI from. Okay.
Maybe they don't have power now, but abolishing them is at least an acknowledgement of the harms they have committed and the discontent felt by the thousands of people around the world who do not think that this institution represents them or the values they hold.
Okay, we believe that this is a very marginal gain, first of all, and secondly, the thing is that this is the only remaining platform that can actually bridge these grievances for what they have done. When you abolish the monarchy, people are still going to think that the UK did all of this to their country, right? It happens regardless of whether the monarchy is still present or not, because they did it in the past, and the monarchy still existing here is the only thing that can actually bridge this, right? And that can actually bring a difference to show that the country itself is sorry, right? Instead of abolishing it, because people are not going to care. They still hate the country regardless. They associate with the country itself. Okay, so finally, why is it so important that the UK keep the symbol of soft power in and of itself, right? Because it is the monarchy that is still on the news every single time. I'm from Hong Kong. I don't see anything about Spain's king or the dead kings of France. I don't know about Louis 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And this is also the reason why people don't visit the House of Versailles as much as they do to Buckingham House or Kensington, because these palaces still exist. People still see the monarch, and it's not something that is based off a dead person who doesn't appear in your life in any way. But unlike all the previous unlike the monarchs that the UK still has, right? This is the only remaining soft power the UK still has. The only other thing that they have is Peppa Pig, and even Peppa Pig is being trumped on by Australia's Bluey or whatever, right? And this is the only reason of soft power that the UK can still have. And this is a unique benefit that only we can bring to show that the UK still exists. The UK still exists, and this is our soft power to engage in international planning, international organizations that people still know the country. And this is a unique benefit that only we have. And to be fair, they don't really have a single benefit that is not marginal that can stand. And this is why we must and shall take. Are we? Okay. We oppose this motion. Thank you.
I thank that EUDU Robbed opposition, and I call upon member of government.
Oh no, I've done something to my timer. Okay, fix that. One. I'm going to come directly off of this last point about soft power. Why is soft power actually relevant? Soft power is the idea that you were able to like exert a certain amount of like political emphasis on other countries. This is not possible within the status quo of what the monarchy currently is. I will get into that when I talk about my main points. But first of all, I want to tell you right now that we understand on both sides of the house that the monarchy itself is not committing like actually any actions. It has no general like cause in the society. It's not actually actively doing anything. It's not part of any kind of like big long-term thing as an institution, right? But what we will tell you in our speech is this idea that regardless of this, the harms of what it can do when it's not actively achieving anything beneficial is much, much larger than this idea of just having it around for cultural phenomenon. But then I'm also going to tell you why the cultural phenomenon point just doesn't exist, right? That my rebuttal will be part of my speech in this, right? So first of all, I'm going to tell you that OG tells you that diplomatic areas of the monarchy have like financial flaws. We're going to tell you that there are practical and political issues with the diplomatic responsibilities of the monarchy and why this is so bad, right? We tell you that like in countries where they like where anyone like countries that have faced colonialism were gonna hate the monarchy anyway. This is not true. Britain is a very big country. These countries are forced having to like interact with the monarchy on like a general notice. Like for example, the example I'm going to give is like Pakistan. It interacts with England and Britain as a culture, regardless of the fact that it's like a post-colonialist country, and regardless of the fact that it's been very screwed over financially and economically, right? But what I am going to tell you is that it does not appreciate the monarch coming over on these diplomatic missions. Why is this true? Because the monarch is unable to actually engage in anything politically. They are apolitical. They are supposed to be neutral. That is their role. That is their honor. What does this mean? This means that when Kate Middleton goes to Pakistan during times when it needs serious relief efforts and it needs the Britain to take accountability for the actions that are happening, whether it be global climate effects that are causing shock climate in Southeast Asia, as opposed to like post-colonialist things, those monarchs who are coming over and being representatives of the country cannot actually do anything. They are going over for no reason, right? What does this cause? This causes insult to the country. In a country that generally respects the UK, regardless of the history, we know that these countries generally respect the UK, as in they do trade, they still interact with them on a global scale. They have not caused any, they have not said anything major, right? It is insult to injury when Kate Middleton comes over and just plays cricket instead of actually addressing the issues within the country, right? What is the alternative for this? If we abolish the monarchy, who will be forced to go on these state missions instead? This is likely to be ministers, prime ministers, etc., to go over and actually do something because they can engage in political conversation. What this also looks like is that when heads of state come to the UK, they are forced to meet with the head of state of the UK, who is the Queen, who is the King. Sorry guys, I'm in the past a bit. But who is the king, right? They're forced to meet with these individuals as opposed to actual people who they can engage in conversation with, right? Sure, this might work on an allied stage, but when it's already difficult enough to invite people who we aren't necessarily allied with, why are we wasting time by forcing them to do state discussions, etc., with the head of monarch who can't actually do anything politically, right? This also looks like, this also has great backlash from the British public. Like in the history, when people were very anti against Saudi for the way that they acted against women and just in general with like human rights or whatever, when the Prince of Saudi Arabia would come to the UK, he would discuss with the Queen, but that is not something that the British people want because they wanted to see real political change enacted. That is not something that the monarch can be able to pressurize, right? You need pressure for inherently political meetings is undertaken in an apolitical manner with the current system of having the monarchy, right? Okay, yeah, I'll take a POI now. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So when the UK sends a diplomatic mission, there are two types, right? So there are these diplomatic goodwill missions from the monarchy, and there are also actual diplomatic missions that actually strike.
Why separate them? Why separate them? Why separate them? If you are going to be wasting time and resources, we've told you that there's financial impact of sending these monarchs abroad to do these things. Why not send people who can actually go and make a change, as opposed to sending someone symbolic, which is insulting to the countries that they're going to? How is it helpful for them to have these goodwill, like symbolic missions of the monarch when they have actual real life problems within the country that they're dealt with, and they have to take time out of the schedule to help the individuals and their constituents to go and meet these monarchs? Okay, yes, and I'm going to tell you the second point here, which is nip it in the bud, right? This idea that the monarchy is culturally significant. I think we actually relatively agree on the fact that the monarchy is culturally significant, but we're telling you to retain that cultural significance. Oh my god. retain that cultural significance, you need to nip it in the bud. This means that we abolish the monarchy now, when we see that it is actively going downhill, when we see that it is actively having aspects to it that are that the general public genuinely does disagree with. We see that the actions of the monarchy in regards to how they treated Meghan Markle and how now we see it with Prince Andrew is something that people really, really despise. It is why we have so many more conversations about abolishing the monarchy. Why do we not abolish the monarchy now when we know that we can retain some of the good parts of the monarchy that is so culturally significant, this idea of having like a state, having like this big, like overwhelming presence or whatever. Why not retain it when it's still in a good light? Why do we continue with it deteriorating this image of the monarchy when we know that many things can go wrong, right? If you want the historical aspects of it, if you still want tourism, stop the monarchy at a point where you can still be proud of some of its things, right? If we continue going on, it's going to be overshadowed by continuous harms, etc., that are likely to occur because we live in an era now where everyone's actions come to light eventually, as opposed to in the past when there was little scrutiny to what the monarch could be doing. We see that like the stakes are so high for literally no reward. Why do we put ourselves in a position where we were unable to maintain a good image for the monarchy if we don't abolish it now? Yeah, guys, I've written some things, yeah. And also the cultural dying out of the monarchy, right? If we are able to abolish the monarchy now, this puts the monarchy that we have in a current state, in the current state in a much better light, right? It puts in a much better idea because we know that the time has come and the time has passed, right? If we continue going on like this, we see that the cultural significance of the monarchy is dying down. We see this because people don't say Queen Elizabeth, or people used to say Queen Elizabeth and now they just say Charles. They don't have any respect for the monarchy to a certain extent. The cultural significance of the monarchy is dying down. He was at London Fashion Week. You think they would have done that like 100 years ago? A monarch would have gone to something like that, right? You think that there's any like cultural significance within the monarchy that is already dying out actively? If we abolish it at this stage now, we are able to hold on to some of the benefits of having such a strong monarchy in the past without it being actively seen as something that overstood its time, right? What have I told you today? I told you this idea that the monarch is a cultural figurehead who allows you to bridge the fight against colonialism is not true because it's actively putting salt on the wounds. We tell you that they are taking over time where actual real diplomatic measures can be taken. We tell you in their alternative, who are likely to be ministers and other political figures who are able to actually achieve something, it is much more beneficial for all parties involved for those people to be ahead. And also there was a point about like artifacts being sold. Those things can be sold for reparations, which is even more beneficial for the other countries, and therefore you'll have a better impact on Britain as a whole, which is what people negotiate with. Thank you.
Member of Government and Equivalent Member of Opposition.
I'm just getting up my time thingy. Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Even if OG wins on a cost-democracy comparative, we show that the hidden structural harms make abolition, rather than just reduction in funding, urgent and morally necessary. We tell you that in the future, you're going to be able to hold better relations with countries by treating them with respect and not just by sending a figurehead. Even if opposition can point to small benefits like tourism or tradition, those are replaceable and contingent, whereas the structural damage uniquely identified by closing Gov is symmetric and unavoidable as long as the monarchy exists. This is why our material must be given greater weight. I'm going to start with some rebuttal before explaining why our points weigh over opening. So firstly, I'm going to start with the member's speech and then go forward to like the opening half. So the member brought us a couple points. The first being that royal family brings money into a royal trust, and that they earn a lot of this money on the trust and donate to government because they're still in power. The point that we bring towards this is that tax is continuous and they're able to remove donation from this trust at any point. Tax has stability and therefore more security. The issue we have with the royal family is that there's very little stability guaranteed. The fact that they're a power that like we cannot take away, they're not easily enforceable, and it's not something that we can hold in terms of checks and balances, means that although they're like charitable in giving us these donations, there's no guarantee that this is going to continue to happen. Whereas if they're removed and we know that this taxation is in place, we have a continual means of ensuring that they are giving back to the government and to the people, and therefore it's something that is like more structurally bound and secure. The second point they bring is that it's an apolitical figure that can go and take the role of politicians, which don't necessarily have enough time and can build good relationships. We say that foreign affairs is one of the biggest areas of political election. Therefore, they are far more apt to deal with these issues and are going to be more widely respected than sending a ceremonial figure, which also ties into the next point on face-saving politics, which was also a point raised by opening. So it was kind of suggested that the crown is going to be, for some reason, going to be widely respected by other nations in a second. But this is not something that we agree with. We see that the crown is a reason that there's a lot of these historical grudges in the first place, and a lot of reasons why countries don't necessarily align with England, because they feel that they were, in the past, mistreated by the country. Sending the exact figurehead that caused these discrepancies is not exactly going to solve the issue, especially when these figures are going and then demanded to be respected in the sense of being bowed at and being respected like they're the most important figure in the world. It's not something that these nations are going to respect and support when they feel like these countries have been taking advantage of them in the past. It's offensive to figure a country that you previously colonized, abused for resources, and manipulated religious guilt to give them more money, to then go and demand that they respect you and say oh, you're benefited that a purely ceremonial figure is coming to praise your lands and be really nice to you. Whereas if you go with a clear governmental aim and you give a figure that can actually make parliamentary change, it shows that you have a lot more respect for the nation, and therefore this is more likely to be something that these individuals respect. Also with government officials, they're more likely to have a clear knowledge of policy, because this is something that's required for them to be elected. With the crown, we assume this is something they're going to take, but it's not anything that's necessarily enforced, and it's not something that they necessarily require, especially as they try to remain apolitical, but this just means that we're unaware of their political standing, and therefore when they do try and invoke policy in certain places, we're unaware how this is going to land. It means that we're less certain and we can't predict if they do prevent a policy being passed. It's not something that you could have prepared for because you're unaware of their political standing, which is not the case for governments, as they have to share their political standing to get into power in the first place. There was a whole big point of theirs being made about a political debate as a strongman policy. I'm going to take after this point. Having a division of power in terms of head of state between PM and monarchy does not help this presentation, but rather confuses it, as it appears our nation is fighting for power and gives us a less clear, powerful position than if we had one head of state, which is the Prime Minister, as something that's publicly elected. Not only because this is something that England itself would be more likely to support, given that many, many people in England despise the crown and think that it's really embarrassing, especially because the lack of power they now hold, and they're just there being a really, the king can't even tie his shoes. That's so embarrassing to have that as your head of state. Can we not have a Prime Minister that's publicly elected? I'll take your point.
Yeah, could you try to think of this bizarre scenario where the king and queen are still in power, but somehow they've stopped donating all their money, even though they've done it for the past 100 years? How does this scenario kind of look like?
The fact that they have the power to they've been donating this money for a long time, but the fact that they can remove at any point and we don't have any checks and balances to keep them in place means that this is a greater risk than if they were taxed, because then there are these checks and balances. We're looking at a risk-reward scenario. They give us little reward. We're looking at the risk. Therefore, it's more likely and more beneficial for them to be removed. Okay, I'm now going to go on to our main points. So there's nothing to be held accountable to, as they're not publicly elected. But they represent the British public. This should be weighed over opening's benefits, because the democratic accountability member identifies is a prerequisite to legitimate governments, whereas opening's impacts, like cost or symbolism, are optional add-ons that hold less impact. Pressure to represent correctly in politicised events should be put on individuals that can be held electorally accountable. The king legitimizes stuff that government passes, but this is an unnecessary measure. It's purely demonstrational. Why put faith and power in an institution that the population doesn't even support and isn't something that they can hold accountable through elections taken?
Okay, so don't you agree that keeping the crown for them to be able to do diplomatic actions and take responsibility for what their family has done would be more effective in solving grievances than UK to just abolish them and say, oops, we didn't like them anyway.
Okay,
so
they can take
whether we hate them or not.
they can take accountability for these grievances, but one, that's assumption that we have good faith in the crown, which we have seen is not necessarily the case. A lot of members of the crown don't necessarily take accountability for these actions. If anything, they just protect their family. The fact that Prince Andrew was only removed from the royal family after a lot of time, and he already caused a lot of harm to the English image, because why is our royal family supporting a pedo? It's weird for us to have this institution that protects their own family members over actually supporting the nation. This is something that, a lot of the opposition case rests on the idea that the crown is going to just be good people and that going to be really moral. But this assumption has no foundation. Like, there's nothing to keep these people accountable if they don't hold the standard of morality, whereas when we have parliament or like politicians, there is a standard of accountability that we can keep, therefore they're more likely to be something that we should keep in power. Okay, monarchy is a constitutional distortion device, less accountability afforded to parliament because government actions formally taken in the name of the crown, which allows politicians to deflect responsibility and it prevents a clear separation of powers as government can hide behind royal prerogative powers. What are the results of this? It causes a constitutional stagnation as there's no incentive to reform. And an executive overreach hidden behind tradition that, while not frequently enforced, has very harsh impacts when it is, and it's a risk too strong to ignore given that there's no benefits provided. Okay, it also hinges our system. Okay.
Hi guys, if it's okay, I'm gonna sit down, alright? If everyone is ready, my time will start now. So just a bit of signposting first. I will be going on to talk about what the main pushes we see from OG and CG, the main clashes that we get from them, and then moving on to what I think are the impacts that we bring forth in this debate. So first of all, let's talk about OG. I think the main arguments and clashes that we see from OG is firstly, the monarchy uses up taxpayer money for useless endeavors. Secondly, the monarchy will still have some kind of status if we remove their titles but still give them Buckingham Palace and such. And lastly, they say that it will be the monarchy is non-representative and it is highly nepotistic. So a few responses to this and on the clashes that we have. So first of all, on the point of taxpayer money, I believe Nikita has already talked to you about the mechanisms such as the trust fund the Crown Trust that is already in place. And I think that OG is ultimately underestimating the Crown's social power over the people. This is something that the people ultimately need, and it's not just a useless throw of money. Sorry, 1 second. For example, I went to an American school in China, and my AP English teacher cried the day that Queen Elizabeth died. Like, she cried in class. I feel very sorry for her, but I think it just goes to show these people do genuinely have a lot of social influence over the people. And for example, like, not even just Queen, I know Queen Elizabeth was like highly problematic, but like if we look at Princess Diana, like guys, the UK people are so proud to have Princess Diana even after so long. There were incredibly positive global reactions even years after her death that the British people are inherently extremely proud of. I'll take your POI.
Yeah, on money, Cyrus explains that over their entire existence, they've accumulated huge amounts of wealth you can tax once you stop giving them exemptions. Maybe they stop donating, but now you have a wealth of resources which you can tax in spades to make up for the lack of donation that they do.
I think this problem on like unchecked wealth and nepotism will exist ultimately with or without the monarchy. I think in the monarchy we see cases of nepotism and people having a large amount of money given to them at birth, but this also doesn't change the fact that there are some kinds of checks and balances in place that other kids of nepotism, like just in capitalism alone, like if the problem is nepotism here, I don't think we should be abolishing the monarchy. I think we should abolish capitalism. But moving on from that, talking about the point that the monarchy will still have some kind of social status, so the people won't fall apart and cry every day. So I was quite confused by OG's framework of this debate, and hence I asked a clarification on whether or not the royal family will still be able to call themselves the king and the queen. And I've gotten the answer that the government will not in fact allow this, but they might still call themselves that. So I don't think the royal family will be allowed to legally call themselves the king and the queen if the government nullifies this name. And hence I do not believe that OG's claim that the monarchy can still have a social status is relevant. And in fact, what this will look like on the government bench is that there will be no more status insofar as their title is stripped, and the Buckingham Palace will just become like a fucking museum. Okay. Moving on to being non-representative. I think ultimately the monarchy is not meant to be representative anymore, but more so symbolic, as OO has already pushed forward. And ultimately, I think OG's case is overly idealistic. While nepotism is horrible, they fail to engage with the inherent ties the UK has with the monarchy, and they fail to engage with how the UK, as an extremely unique political body, would be able to do better under forms of untested democracy, one in which we cannot use other countries to balance or compare because of how quirky the UK is. It is their burden to prove the marginal benefit, and we have not yet to hear back from this. I'll take your POI from closing.
Okay, you say that the royal family won't necessarily still have a hold. Do you not think that Prince Harry is still given recognition even though he's not part of the royal family and he's still considered a prince?
The Prince Harry recognition, he does have a lot of clout online, but the clout online is primarily negative. And hence, as a result, because the clout is negative, it's not representative of him as a part of the royal family. And because of that negativity, I don't believe that that is the kind of social status that the royal family has been putting forth in the past couple decades. And it's not the kind of positive influence that we also have seen them being able to give to the British public overall. I'll take another POI quickly, yeah.
You're talking about social status of the monarchy is going to be in goodwill. We see right now that the monarchy is made of Prince Philip, who people hate because what the hell his name is Charles because of Diana, and then people hate his son William for cheating on his wife. There's already a negative implication of the royal family.
I completely understand that, and I will admit that the past monarchs that we have seen, such as Princess Diana, possibly Queen Elizabeth, depending on who you ask, has had positive influence, and rather the monarchs that we see right now have primarily negative influence. I absolutely agree, but this does not change the fact that the monarchy is an institution in the UK that does hold soft power over a large amount of time, and as Nikita has already talked to you about, the whole strong man loving the idea of power. The British monarchy, because it has been in power for so long, if we were to switch it up with politicians that are relatively short term and have not been that established, it will be much less political sway for the UK. For example, the example that me and Nikita talked about in our prep was Margaret Thatcher making deals with other countries versus Queen Elizabeth, which obviously has much more political sway. And so moving on to CG, I think our main clash was diplomatic missions and whether or not these diplomatic missions will be solving the issue rather than a distraction of just having a figurehead. So I think if the UK has yet to send proper diplomatic help to countries such as Pakistan, they are not going to suddenly pour their economic and political power into sending the PM to do proper political intervention like building systematic changes like mass spending in infrastructure. We think that this is highly speculative, especially as the UK is truly not known for political accountability in post-colonial countries. If we get rid of Kate Middleton and instead double the PM's visit to Pakistan, he'll probably play cricket and also gift them corgis or something. But even if more realistically, what we will see is what Nikita tells you, that the PM has no time to actually deal and no incentive to actually deal with these issues if they haven't already, despite the negative feedback that they have received. And if they haven't cared enough up until now, they also won't if King Charles becomes just Charles. A Gov Wood tells you that these people will be happier simply by seeing someone who looks like they're doing something, but I think two reasons why this is not true. So I think people in such countries are not stupid enough to just see a political figurehead come here and assume that they're going to do something. Okay, so if the Prime Minister lands in Pakistan, shakes a few hands, they're not going to automatically just think, that's so much better than what the Queen is doing, they're completely changing our lives. And because it is purely speculative and nothing has actually happened, the people will be pissed anyway as a result. And we don't think that diplomatic missions is something that will be solved on the government bench. Thank you.
Opposition whip, and then we'll see the debate. I'm not going to give you any general feedback. You can approach myself and, of course, the other panelists with whom I had a great discussion. I'll give you the call and the results, and then the reasons for the call, rather. Okay. So the call is as follows. The first goes to opening government, the second to closing opposition, the third to closing government, and the fourth, unfortunately, to opening opposition. So let's get into it. What does OG give us? OG gives us broadly two arguments. Firstly, about costs, and secondly, about the illegitimacy and how this sort of repairs that. Firstly, on costs, they give me a number of reasons as to why lots of taxes go to them. I think the first reason they gave me for this is like trips and diplomacy. This reason itself I thought was less persuasive, because like, isn't someone doing these trips in diplomacy anyway, so aren't you spending the money anyways? But the other reasons they give me, things like, you have to maintain these palaces, et cetera, do prove to me there is some cost, but also they give me reasons as to why, they have lots of wealth. This comes out very specifically in DPM, that these people, they have lots of wealth that they've accrued and that have multiplied over the generations, which you can now tax, whereas previously you couldn't. I think, yeah, and I'll talk about this more when we get to LO. They also give me this other thing about illegitimacy, how they are not elected. They were set up back when everyone was white and therefore currently not representative of the Commonwealth or anything, and they got a lot of their power because of colonialism and things, which was pretty obviously not a good thing, pretty obviously illegitimate. Yeah, bringing in opening opposition. Opening opposition give us a few different things. Oh, well, I got this the wrong way around. They first tell me tourism is super important, and that that tourism is super linked to the monarchy. I think, I'll talk about this with DPM. They then tell me soft power is generally quite important, then state visits, and then finally like how they can repair relations by doing crown jewels and stuff. How does this interact with opening government? On net. Firstly, on things like tourism and money, I think opening government give me good reasons as to why they have a lot of money in status quo that you are not taxing, and now you can tax it as per their model. Thus, you can you very clearly get a lot of money, which they then explain will be spent relatively well. Specifically with the tourism things, I think it's slightly underproven why it is necessarily the monarchy that results in these people wanting to go to wherever they're going to, people coming to want to see it. I think, like you yourself say, I think in DLO that no one cares about the Spanish monarchy and going to see the Spanish castles, but Spain also has a monarchy that is like currently similar to the figureheads here in the UK. Meaning, then again, you're bringing your own things into doubt as to what is unique about the British monarchy that that brings tourists in. I think we get a better explanation of this from DPM, who explains there's lots of things like pointy hats and other ceremonial stuff that you can keep on their side of the house that brings tourists in. Secondly, on soft power. It's difficult for me to understand why I really care about soft power, given that this isn't an actor debate. We're not talking about this house as the UK would get rid of the monarchy. So unless you weigh the UK as an actor that I should really care about, it's difficult for me to, even if I credit you with this, with these mechanisms, it's difficult for me to feel that your impacts are super important compared to their impacts from them, from OG, things like this is going to be used for welfare and other good things that taxes go to. That is intuitively a bit more important. And the next thing, things like your links to previous colonies. I think this clashes well when we get to back half, but it's unclear to me on face why the Prime Minister is unable to do this. I think you tell me they are uniquely well known, the Crown, but again, why, on intuition, I think the Prime Minister of the UK is also pretty well known around the world as one of the leaders of the free world, etc., etc. So it's unclear to me why it's specifically the monarchy that you need to do this. And your final case about they can give back crown jewels. You didn't give me incentive analysis as to why they're likely to do this, given that they haven't done this historically. Like the Kohinoor is still in the hands of the British crown jewels, as opposed to back in India or wherever. So on these grounds, I think your case sort of falls to what we get from opening government, which is better proven, but also there's good rebuttal to your case. So bringing in closing opposition. The main thing we credited with closing opposition is, again, this sort of diplomatic visits and soft power thing that you bring. You tell me that, you tell me that in status quo, the royals do a lot of visits, which possibly takes up time from the PM doing visits, and the people don't like this because because the royals can't actually do anything. They would rather someone with actual power visit them so that they can, do stuff. Maybe this is true, but you do get the impact of maybe there is an insult to the country. Maybe the people of the country feel insulted because of the historic ties of the monarchy with the colonialism. I think it's again slightly underexplained why other ministers of the British state aren't going to have the similar ties with colonialism. But I think perhaps perhaps you get the impact of some people might feel a bit more insulted because of continuity, etc., etc. So why does this beat opening opposition? Firstly, Dylan has just left, but again, feel free for feedback afterwards as well. So why does this beat opening opposition? I think opening opposition's main push, and the one we can somewhat credit, is things like the previous, the links with the Commonwealth and the previous colonies. Again, but the problem from opening opposition was the comparative as to why the Prime Minister is unable to do this, and therefore it's hard for me to fully credit you with an impact in this regard. However, from closing government, even if, and this is rebuttal that CEO gives you, so I'm not going to really talk about it, but even on, talk about it for this clash, but even on face, even if we say the Prime Minister can do these things, and that you just get, if you get rid of all the monarchic stuff and instead have other ministers going, or maybe you just have fewer visits overall, you still get rid of the insult that some people might feel in those countries. And I think at the point at which we agree that the colonialism was bad and that some people are likely to therefore feel insulted, I can buy that as an impact coming from closing government. Cool. So that's why closing government beats opening opposition. Why does closing government, however, fall to their opening? So there's a couple things. Firstly, I think responses from opening government are better than the responses from closing government, and a lot of responses to opening opposition bench in general. And I think a lot of the responses you try and give, and this is going to become important for a comparison with CO as well, are already present in opening government. So something I might recommend is like tracking what they're saying as well. So not just the substantive, but also the responses they're giving, so you don't like repeat the same thing. But secondly, I think opening government are generally more mechanistically rigorous. They give me reasons as to why, A, you're going to get more money and this money is going to be broadly spent well, but also the strong thing about how this is like fully an illegitimate thing that you need to get rid of. Your stuff, as I said, maybe there's an insult, perhaps, but it's unclear to me how many people get insulted, as in, like, do they even know the monarch is visiting them? Is this like only people in the capital city who know this, or like do people around the country, in Pakistan being your example, like I don't know, in the Baloch region, do they care? Do they know this? Do they feel insulted? I don't know. Meaning, so firstly on like scale, but also just on general intuition of like what is more important. It is clear to me that things like welfare and just general illegitimacy seems far more important. That's something that's proven by opening government than some people somewhere feeling a bit insulted. Thus, you take it below your opening. Finally, bringing in closing opposition. Closing opposition does some really cool things. They tell me, they give me good reasons as to why there are these goodwill missions and why it is uniquely the monarch that has to do it. They through examples like the Gulf states, in certain settings it is the monarch that can do it best. Places like where they have strongman leaders, and in the Gulf states, for example, or other autocratic regions, but also currently because there's a rise in autocracy even in previously democratic states, it is it's quite important therefore to have an autocrat who can have better relations as a result. They also give me this thing about taxes and how the Crown Trust gets a lot of revenue that they all donate entirely to the government. My problem with this is it's slightly assertive. I think I can buy it to the degree that I think it is probably true, but also you didn't really explain it. You just said this is what happens. If you gave me a few more reasons as to why this happens, it would be it's just easier for the panel to buy on the whole. The third thing we get is the constitution thing and how this is going to, because as a result of there not being a constitution and because of the current political climate here in the UK, this is going to lead to a culture war of sorts. And I think your impacting here was good, but we didn't fully on the panel buy that there is going to be a culture war over this. You need to explain to me why this is such an important part of the British culture and why certain groups, for example, Reform UK that you brought up, have incentives to really make this a big thing and then do culture wars, etc. Cool. So firstly, why does this beat their opening? I think the strongest thing that we credited from their opening was perhaps the links with their previous colonies, but again, the issue we had with this is it's difficult for us to fully understand why the Prime Minister or some other minister can't do it. I think from closing, we get the reasons as to why in certain settings it is best that the monarch does it and that the Prime Minister or other ministers, because they are elected and not autocratic, won't have the same impact. So they give me a unique thing that the Crown has to do as opposed to other ministers. So on a vertical extension, I think they're able to take it over you, not to mention the other things. On closing half, I think closing half was, so there's really, really good responses coming from closing government to the closing opposition case. So some of these responses include things like, where'd it go? Yeah, things like the PM and other ministers just don't have the time to do these state visits. So at best, what you're saying is, yeah, sure, the monarch is now not doing state visits, but no one else is doing these extra state visits. Like it's not that those state visits aren't being replaced by someone else. As a result, the net interaction between these two countries, and thus perhaps the net good that could be done, is again further limited. So it again mitigates your case to the point at which, yeah, maybe there's some insult happening somewhere, but it's a bit nebulous as to who, why, etc. So there's really good responses there. Again, your responses that you gave to closing opposition, so things like, where'd it go? Yeah, the Crown is the real reason for these historical issues. They are continuous as opposed to not like the actual government that's changing all the time, etc., etc. Thus, it is uniquely offensive. I think this was already present in DPM when they explained to me why. They pretty much those exact words as to why this is the real reason. They have continuity, etc., etc. So your responses to them don't fully land as a result. Their responses to you are, I think, successfully mitigatory and marginalizes your case to the point at which I buy that some of that in certain settings, the goodwill stuff that the Crown can do is actually quite good. And in certain settings, might not be great, but the harm you're proving there is a bit more nebulous as to, like, again, insults, what does that actually mean, etc. We resolved the back half clash in favor of closing government. And finally, on the long diagonal, so there's a couple of different interesting things to talk about. I personally think opening government was able to prove that the tax and money thing more than, and like in favor of government bench rather, than what closing opposition gave us. I think other members of the panel thought this was closer than I did. I think DPM does tell me why this is. They have vast amounts of money that you can, tax now as a result now, and it's unclear to me how much money is actually in the Crown Trust. You give me a number of like £1 billion, but I don't know if that's true or not. Again, that was largely asserted. So if you gave me reasons as to why this is a lot of money in the Crown Trust and why the Crown Trust is fully donated. Whereas I think the only reason you gave me is because they want to be in good touch with the government. It would be easier for me to resolve at least this clash in favor of you, but I think from the work that is done from opening government is a bit more proven and a bit more mechanistically rigorous compared to your stuff on this clash. But also the second clash about like legitimacy, I think this is quite strong coming from opening government, as they've given me lots of reasons why this isn't a legitimate institution. And even perhaps if you get some benefits of in certain settings, it is better to do diplomacy this way. I think the overall sort of like principled harm, but also the actual practical thing of like some people feel heard, and some people, when you acknowledge that this crime was done and now the criminals are no longer in power, etc., in power, does outweigh for us the stuff you give me about like certain diplomatic missions. Does that hopefully that will make sense? Again, if you want more detailed feedback, if you want more details on particular clashes and how we adjudicated things, please feel free to ask me. Feel free to ask Neve and Dylan, who were all great on the panel. Thanks.
Thank you very much.